Now everybody wants more control around the greens, so in this video I'm going to give you my top 5 tips to make sure that you're generating the maximum amount of spin possible. Tip number 1 is to make sure that you're using the correct golf ball. Now a hard 2-piece golf ball like this one isn't really going to cut the mustard, so you're going to have to invest in some quite expensive golf balls. That's unless you want to buy grade A pearls. They're a little bit cheaper and do perform pretty much exactly the same. The issue with the cheaper golf balls, usually they're, like I said, 2-piece, sometimes 3-piece. The less pieces there are, the less spin you get. So something like a Pro V1 or the equivalent, 4-piece, even now 5-piece golf balls, the more layers there are, as a general rule, there's going to be more backspin. So make sure you're using the correct ball. Tip number 2 is to keep all of your grooves nice and clean, in particular on your wedges. Now the grooves on your clubs work in the same way as the grooves on your car tyres. They displace moisture and debris away from the surface that the road is touching or the surface that the golf ball is touching, and taking that debris, popping it in the grooves, that helps to retain friction. Retaining friction in golf increases spin. Now keeping the grooves nice and clean is actually quite simple. You can just use a T-peg or you can buy a brush from the pro shop. Tip number 3 is to keep the club face as dry as you possibly can. Now that's obviously quite simple. Everybody should have a towel on the golf bag, and before you're taking a shot, in particular in winter when the ground's more than likely going to be wet, just make sure that the club face is as dry as you can get it. So if you're taking practice swings, I'd advise taking practice swings above the ground just to try and keep that moisture off the club face. Moisture on the club face is going to reduce friction, reducing friction again, reducing spin, you're going to lose a little bit of control. Tips 4 and 5 revolve around technique, so let's get down to the teaching room so I can show you what they are. Tip number 4 is trying to make sure that you keep your swing arc as high as you can. Now that might sound like a lot of technical mumbo jumbo, but basically all it is making sure that you're interacting with the ground as little as possible. We actually want the golf club to feel as though it's skimming across the turf rather than digging into it. And again, the main advantage of that is keeping debris away from the club face, making sure that you're not getting loads of mud and loads of grass and loads of moisture between the club face and the ball, again reducing friction. Best way to practice this is probably at the driving range, on a mat, just trying to hit shots without really feeling as though you're hitting the mat at all. Really feel as though you're picking the ball off the turf with as little interaction with the turf as you can get. Now tip number 5 is actually quite difficult. This is the most difficult tip of these 5, and it's trying to obtain an oblique contact. An oblique contact basically is anti-compression. The more compression, as a general rule, all things being equal, the less spin. So how do we get this oblique contact? Well, part of it is actually tip number 4. If you can hit the bottom of the head, the ball speed will decrease. This is what an oblique contact will do. It will actually reduce the ball speed so that we can actually increase the club speed. If we can increase the club speed, all things being equal, that'll increase the spin rate. So if we can shift the path of the golf club to the left of the club face aim, we can actually get this oblique contact. Now we can only push this so far, but don't worry about swinging left and cutting across the ball with wedges because there's so much loft, it's very difficult to tilt the ball's axis, creating curvature. You might get a little baby fade at most. So if we can shift that club path, I don't know, maybe it's 8-9 degrees left of the face, we're going to get a bit more of an oblique contact, giving us less ball speed. We can then ramp up the club speed, and that's going to allow us to get more spin. This one's probably going to need a launch monitor to practice so that you can verify your club face and club path relationship and actually see the spin rate changing. The best thing to do is probably go and see your local PGA Pro who may have a simulator or a launch monitor that you can hire, and you can actually practice this oblique contact and tip number 4 and see your spin rate increase. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you follow each step you should find that your spin rate starts to increase out there on the golf course, and you should find it a little bit easier to control the shots into the greens. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do so. I'll see you all again soon.